our friend, former colleague, Tulsi Gabbard, now director of national intelligence, made some pretty historic moves. And through a post on X last night, posted, per the president's directive, I have revoked security clearance and barred access to classified information from Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Lisa Monaco, Mark Zaid, Norman Eisen, and it goes on, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Andrew Weissman, along with the 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. The president's daily brief is no longer being provided to former President Biden. So she wanted to clear up this, and clearly they're going through and they're kind of clearing the roles, if you will.
That's right. So this announcement is what many had hoped for or looked for, based off of those that have used their security clearance in a way that could be seen as weaponizing or politicizing that entire process. So you have the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who was the architect of the 51 signers of that Hunter Biden laptop letter before he was Secretary of State. Jake Sullivan, former national security advisor to President Biden, deep state creature. Lisa Monaco, former deputy attorney general. You have Norm Eisman, who worked on the first impeachment of President Trump for the Democrats in Congress. You have Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, obviously famous for their lawfare against President Trump in the lead up to this past election, 2024. And then you have Andrew Weissman, who was a part of the Bob Mueller team who investigated the Russia hoax in the first president's term. And then you have the 51 signers of the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. Those were the national security or former intelligence members of that community that said this is Russian disinformation, and they leaned on their expertise as being part of the intel community and having security clearance, that you must trust us, this is Russian disinformation. We all know that that was false, and it was meant to sway an election in 2020, and to some degree it did have an effect on the way that election turned out. But I think this move by Tulsi Gabbard is also showing that the overclassification of U.S. secrets, which is something we will talk about with Rick coming up, as well as how many security clearances there are out there, give an opportunity for people to monetize their security clearance. And these people have used their credentials as having security clearances to get jobs at large defense contractors, at think tanks, or to be able to try to give credibility to a letter they put out when they're trying to sway a voter's mind about an election. This is holding them accountable, and many of them, it is holding them accountable fiscally with their pocketbooks by saying you're no longer going to use your security clearance to either interfere with our elections and or profit off of past government service.
Rick, I wanted to get your opinion on the news this morning or last night that broke from Tulsi Gabbard, who is current director of national intelligence. You, of course, are a former director of national intelligence, saying, hey, we've revoked security clearances for a lot of top names that you may know: Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, some of your favorites, Rick, Alvin Bragg, Letitia James, and saying, you know what, it's time for these security clearances to end and time to quit briefing these people, specifically if they were involved in things like the Hunter Biden disinformation letter. Now, of course, the left is crying, hey, this is unprecedented. This isn't what we do here. But I wanted to get your feedback and thoughts on this and sort of the move from the Trump administration to not be afraid to break those, I guess, political norms.
When it comes to what Tulsi's doing, I think this is just another common sense approach to being accountable to the people. The people were outraged that this group abused their access to classified information by pretending that something was true when they knew it wasn't. And let me be specific. Most of these individuals never had a briefing on the Hunter Biden laptop and whether or not the intel services thought it was, misinformation or Russian information. There was never a briefing on that. There was never any raw intelligence pointing to that. This was a political calculation by these individuals, and their political calculations were wrapped in their access to classified information. They say things like, oh, I can't tell you, but trust me because I have access to classified information. They abused their position by getting involved in politics and pretending that they knew something. There are a couple of other people that do that regularly. Adam Schiff is one of them. And I think that it's important to hold these people to account. If you're going to have access to classified information, don't go into the public sphere and pretend something is true when it's not. Don't abuse your positions. They did, and Tulsi Gabbard is holding them to account and taking away that access to classified information.
Rick, one question I'm seeing on both Rumble and on YouTube that are coming here, and I think it speaks to a broader issue, one that you've addressed on this broadcast many times with the overclassification of information. But people are asking, why would someone like Letitia James and Alvin Bragg, who aren't federal employees, they're within the state of New York, why would they have a security clearance? And so I think that, one, people just need to kind of know how this process works and maybe how many security clearances are actually out there.
Well, first of all, the security clearance process is abused, and too many people, pretend like they have full access. I can guarantee you that Letitia James only had compartmentalized information. She was probably restricted on what would relate to her job, and probably through terrorism and terrorist threats. And I could make the case that prosecutors need to have access about the threats around them. But they certainly don't need access to the president's daily briefing and to have access to information that we know that they would then abuse. And that's the issue here. When you abuse your position and pretend like you know something that you don't, then I think you should have your clearance taken away, and you should suffer the consequences of not having access to appropriate information. I will say, though, when prosecutors abuse this process, it's really indicative of who they are, and you have to wonder, what else are they abusing with the power that they have?
Is there a need also for people like this to have this kind of clearance post-administration? I think there's probably a lot of our audience, and I see in the comments going, I didn't even understand. I thought, the day the administration changed over, it changed over. I mean, but there are some needs occasionally for people to retain their clearances or to, not have to go through this process again. But again, if you've done something that clearly the American people are voting against, then that should be taken care of. But what about the instances where, again, just to sort of inform our audience why that even happens?
Well, first of all, a lot of former government officials are good people, and they're trying to help the U.S. government in ways that they can be helpful. We want a bipartisan approach to some of these issues. Let me just give you an example. When I negotiated the Kosovo-Serbia deal in the Trump administration, it was a very good deal negotiated by both parties in the Oval Office, and it was really going to move the Balkans forward. When I left and when President Trump left the first administration and Joe Biden took over, his White House did an evaluation. They asked me to brief them on the situation in the Balkans. I briefed them. They did an evaluation, and they decided that they were going to use this agreement and this policy as official U.S. government policy under Joe Biden. They embraced the Trump work that we did. Now, they didn't call it the same thing. That instead of the Trump agreement, they called it the Washington agreement, which was fine. But there were times when in the Balkans during the Biden administration that violence was breaking out. There was the situation where there were hostages taking. People don't like it when I use that word, but I think it's an appropriate word. People were taken, law enforcement officials in the northern part of Kosovo, and it was not a good thing. And they needed someone to go and try to resolve this. They recognized, the Biden team recognized that I had credibility there. So I went to the northern part of Kosovo. I briefed the Biden team. I briefed the White House. I had access to classified information because I was helping them in that situation. They recognized that I could do good work there. And so there are times when the current administration wants to utilize some players. I can think of Bill Richardson. Remember, Bill Richardson was used on the outside numerous times to negotiate for the release of hostages, whether it was in North Korea And multiple administrations used Bill Richardson because he had credibility. We need to get back to that point where you can utilize back channels or other people to further your U.S. policy, to further the policy. But when these individuals abuse their positions, that's when they should be cut off.
We are so excited to announce the ACLJ's brand new app, completely redesigned to provide you with the best tools available to partner with us at the ACLJ. You can watch the daily Seculo program, sign the petitions, customize your ACLJ membership experience, donate with the click of a button, and receive up-to-the-minute critical updates that the mainstream media can't censor. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to your phone's app store, search ACLJ, and click install. It's that simple.